This might be the beginning of the end of a whole currency and a reserve system that we've been living with, half-heartedly, for a long time, especially since World War II. I think the mainstream, they're noticing this, but it's unknown. I can recall not too many years ago, the gold went up a bit, then it went down to $1,000. I think it was 2016, and I thought we were going into another bull market. Even though I've watched this since gold was $35 an ounce, it still is sort of shocking, even though I think, well, why should you be shocked? I'm not shocked, but talk about $3,000 an ounce of gold when I hold up my gold pieces I bought, for about $40 or so. It's just amazing, even though those predictions were available to. As a matter of fact, I got involved when I ran across some Austrian economists who were writing about this in the 1960s, and they predicted that Bretton Woods agreement would break down. We're wasting and spending too much money and giving it away. And sure enough, that is what happened. And that was a big date in my understanding of 1971 in August. The gold window was closed, and look at what's happened since then. I think it's going to continue, and the longer it continues, the more people will be joining us. I think that nobody knows exactly, because sometimes I think, well, this is the takeoff forever and we're going to have, Zimbabwe and have Venezuela. And it doesn't happen because there's a subjective element in there. But what I look at, if I wonder, well, let's say next month we have a correction that is far beyond than people who thought the bulls on this is going up forever and the dollar's going to zero and all of this, they may be shocked. But I think that it could happen, but it's totally unknown. But the thing that I watch to find out when I think, well, maybe it is going to end or something, I look at deficits financing. I think that is the biggest thing. The supply of money and the supply of credit for our evil foreign policy and our wicked domestic policy, our welfare state, and all the special interests that go, and the people demanding more and more. We make an effort, and Trump's trying to make an effort. He's getting a lot of grief over that, of cutting anything. So, Leonard Reed, a favorite of mine in the past, he says, everybody wants to balance the budget, but they all have a but. And that's what we're seeing now. There's a lot of buts out there, and they're going to rally together, so that makes it more difficult. But the deficit is the ultimate tool. And even though Barry Goldwater and the rest talked about this, no calamity occurred, but the handwriting on a wall occurred in August 15th, 1971, and it's been there, and the handwriting is getting bigger and bigger, because how much longer can the whole system tolerate $36 trillion of debt? Even with this serious effort to cut back, I'm not expecting miracles to come up with a balanced budget next year. Well, I think they're all a risk because they aren't part of our supposedly tradition. They're not part of our Constitution. But right now, the big ones, the Middle East, they're coming up with these assumptions. Oh, well, I think what we ought to do is just take over Greenland. There's a limit to that, but that could lead to problems too. But I think right now, Yemen and Iran, the way we're treating them, that doesn't sound to me like we're stopping wars and not starting any new ones. We are aggravating. We have a terrible policy with the Iranians. They're not going to be perfect citizens, according to a lot of Americans. But I tell you what, I happen to believe the issue because of the investigations that are going in. I think that they have the brains not to have a nuclear weapon over there. That's what we dwell on, and that's what we concentrate on. And I don't like the warnings that are going on and the advisors that are giving the president advice right now, especially in the area of Yemen and the Middle East, as well as Iran. Well, the economy I like is referred to as a non-interventionist economy, and a laissez-faire as far as I'm concerned. But once they start manipulating and they believe in interventionism, both major parties and most people believe in some interventionism. But I worry about that because that's endorsing the principle. So if you introduce the principle of a little bit of inflation, a little bit of a dilution away from the definition of your currency, it leads to big trouble. How about a small little income tax? Oh, 1, 2, 3%. No big deal. It just grows and grows. So it's the principle that we accept, and we accept the idea of interventionism, and therefore all of a sudden, I imagine there's a level of tariffs, competition that you could get by with for a while, but eventually people depend on it. They want to cover their bases, and then we hear stories, well, we're going to collect a lot of money, on tariffs, and maybe we can get rid of the income tax. I don't happen to believe that. That's not going to happen because they're not stopping the spending. The people want spending. The special interests want the spending. The military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industry, the recipients of Social Security. It's on and on. So the odds of that being cut back are very slim, although I give a lot of credit to the group now trying to cut back because the information we've gotten about USAID, it's fantastic. It's waking up some people, but it's not the solution. We have to not tinker around the edges, and we have to do it. Now, right away, there's tremendous resistance to the effort made in the last 6 months. I think we have a long way to go, and it's not going to do it because I work on the assumption that all the debt and all the malinvestment eventually has to be liquidated because it's all fake. And you can't just pile debt on debt. But too many people talk about malinvestment. You know, debt goes up and is spent the wrong way and it introduces all these government programs. But there's also people who just inadvertently, oh, the interest rates are 4%. They're not 6% anymore. Oh, it's a good time to invest. Well, that's false information. So that's how you get your bubbles. And I think the system is built in and we've gotten away with it by covering it over these bubbles that want to clear the area to cover them with more inflation. Yeah. Oh, we didn't lower the interest rates quite enough. So they just go on and on with intervention. The principle is interventionism, and the opposite of that is non-intervention, and we don't want authoritarians tell us how to live. Well, they're rejecting it because they're very angry, and that's good and healthy, but it depends on what they want to do. When I was still in office, and that's not too long ago, we always have had some inflation. So if somebody comes in and there's a spell of price inflation, I would have people come in and say, this is terrible. This inflation is bad. But they weren't very open to my suggestion of where it comes from. You know, the printing press, they say, what we need and we want you to help us do is get more money. I think there's an effort and a demand, and a lot of people are hopeful, but I don't have a lot of optimism to say they're really on the right track and we're going to see real cuts. Some of these proposals, they don't get into the budget. You don't see any slashing of the budget. They can't even pass a budget. They're waiting another month or two to hope they can pass, the next budget. So the atmosphere is still there, and I think it's a contest between the people that are surviving, but unfortunately, the people who are surviving are, pretty well-to-do. And the unfortunate thing, whether it's tariffs or taxes or inflation, it's the poor and the middle class that get wiped out. Yes, they want to stop, but they're not sophisticated enough and say, well, it all has to do with the Federal Reserve. If we just could audit the Federal Reserve, we would do something about the Federal Reserve because that's where the problem comes from. That's where the inflation starts. But that's a bigger task than just saying prices are high or there's a tariff we can put on. We need to protect our car industry. That's a lot of tinkering that almost always escalates into serious problems. The founders warned us that if you do too much of that, you're going to have a hot war, not just a tariff war. It's an interference. It's the rejection of freedom, and it's a rejection of the confidence we have as a people that less government is far superior to the amount of government we already have. And the majority of the people, I think, believe that, but getting there is a different story. And that's where I come down on saying there will be liquidation. There's going to be big problems. And I work on the effort of trying to provide the answers to it. The cultural Marxists, they love it because they want riots and they want chaos in the streets because they believe that's good and they want to replace it. Well, the way I see it, yes, it's probably going to happen. I don't argue with them. But what are we going to replace it with? And I see signs that the movement to replace it with a much more sane government, something more like what the founders, proposed, there's an element there. That's where I see growth. That's where I see individuals. That's where I see in the homeschooling groups and private schools, people waking up about COVID, and they woke up about things like USAID. A lot of people know about atrocious and evil spending, stole all that money. People need to talk about stealing and then giving it to special interests more so that people know what's going on and not just say, well, the government needs to spend more money. I would say what they show you won't matter because even if they open up and we say we're going to have 1,010 and they prove it and they show it to you, you don't know who owns it because that loan thing's out. That's a big business there. They're shifting that around and they use that as collateral. The last time they pretended to have a audit in the 50s, it was totally inadequate. They probably looked at about 10% of the gold, then they just peeked in the door of the others. So no, it would expose them too much. That's why they don't want an audit of the Fed. What when we had the gold commission, I introduced a resolution for the commission to audit the gold. There were 17 of us on the commission, and 15 voted say, oh no, we don't need to know. That'll just stir up financial problem. We don't want to scare people. That's how crazy. I don't hold my breath for it, even though I use that as a point to why they do this. Why do they not want us to know exactly what's happening with the finances? And the biggest thing that they protect is the information dealing with international business agreements. So the way the Fed behind the scenes will bail out countries, and I am sure there's trillions and trillions of dollars in the midst of a crisis where they bailing out everybody. That a lot of money is transaction, and they save some, and not too many really go down because everybody has to be saved. I don't think if they have one, even they can't follow it. But I think it's protection of their special interests, the big guys. And they always throw the crumbs to the people. Welfare goes out to the poor, but they never keep up the working man. You know, he has his unions and he has his salaries increase, but they never keep up with inflation. But the people dealing in billions and billions of dollars, they don't care about the price of bread. That's the big difference. They can do it, but it's the idea that there's too many people believe in intervention, that we need government to tell us what to do. And I don't believe in intervention in probably to everything. You know, maybe some of the murderers and killers, yes, but we have laws that gets down and they work relatively well, except we don't restrain the government from lying, cheating, and stealing and starting wars. But the people, you know, are held in check. What happens if you counter money? You go to prison. But now a sacred group of people in Washington can get together and decide how much money to print and what the interest rate should be and how are we going to handle the debt. They're managing an unmanageable system. It's been tried many, many times over history. And I think what we're witnessing now is the signs that it's coming unglued. It's coming apart, and people aren't talking about big picture of bankruptcy. And that's why they're not going to solve the problem until they recognize the true bankruptcy of this country. And that includes the moral bankruptcy of the country as well.